So I rolled up my sleeves and kind of got a vision of what I wanted to accomplish in the next 3 years, took it to my team, and they got really pumped. It was kind of the first time in a long time that they'd had some leadership. We were working 70, 80 hours a week, weekends, no vacations, all this stuff, having a blast, but really out of gas and exhausted.
Oh, yeah.
And so we turned that division around in a year and a half, not 3 years. I got the biggest bonus check I'd ever gotten in my life. It was bigger than my annual salary. I got in the car, I drove home, I was giddy. I could not wait to show it to my wife, Gail. Walked in and showed it to her, and she was kind of nonplussed. She said, "We need to talk." And I was, uh-oh. So we walked into the den, we sat down, she began to tear up. And she said, "First of all, I want you to know how deeply grateful I am for your hard work. But I gotta be honest, you are never at home. And even when you are, your head's somewhere else." Jonathan, I felt like I was facing this impossible choice. I could either go all in on work and really buy into the hustle, I call it the hustle fallacy, or I could put on the ambition brake and kind of throttle back my professional expectations and kind of settle for the sake of my family. So that sent me on a multi-year quest to begin to see if there was really such a thing as life balance. Well, when AI came along, I knew this was unlike any revolution we've ever experienced. I love AI, but I never wanted to usurp my humanity.
Balancing life and work and all that, how do you feel AI fits into that process? Have you thought that through, or have you started bringing that into some of your coaching?
We're having a vigorous conversation at Full Focus among our executive team.
Hi, and welcome to the 91-Day AI Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Mast, and I have got an incredibly special guest today. You hear me say that a lot, but this time we're going above and beyond. You see, for many, many years, I've been reading Michael Hyatt's books. I've been following him. I've been part of so many of his programs, and I am absolutely blessed beyond measure today that Michael and I met through my AI prompting group, and we've been able to communicate, and today we get to have Michael here on the podcast. So Michael, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. You and I have chatted a lot over the past few months via Facebook Messenger and that, and it is an absolute joy to have you here on the podcast today. For anybody who may not know who Michael Hyatt is, would you mind giving us just a quick elevator perspective on who you serve, Michael, and kind of go from there?
Yeah, well, I spent most of my career, Jonathan, and by the way, thank you for that generous introduction, because the truth is, I was a fan of you before we met, because you were like one of the AI, super mentors that I had, and I learned so much from you, so thank you for
thank
that.
you.
But I spent most of my career in the book publishing industry. I've done everything in book publishing, from marketing to administration to sales to executive leadership. Most recently, I was the CEO of Thomas Nelson Publishers, which at the time was the 7th largest book publisher in the U.S. But when we sold the company to HarperCollins, I made my exit. And so I decided I was going to start a company to do what I had always wanted to do, which was to write and to speak. And of course, that was really before, I guess, social media was happening, but really the kind of the world that we live in today was just not there. And so we started the company. I wrote a book, and you've kindly referenced it in many contexts, but a book called Platform, How to Get Noticed in a Noisy World. Thomas Nelson, my old employer, published it. Book went on to be a New York Times bestseller. And so when I started this business, I had a lot of people who had read that book, but wanted consulting or coaching. And gosh, I just didn't have the manpower. It was just me. Mm-hmm. And so then I hired an assistant, and then I started hiring a team. And we kind of grew from there. We got into goal achievement, which is something that's really near and dear to my heart, and to productivity, to mindset, a few other things. Mostly today, through my company, Full Focus, I work with leaders, business owners, people that are really want to achieve their goals, but maybe feel a little bit overwhelmed by life. And our goal is to help people achieve what we call the double win, which is to win at work and succeed at life, or kind of classically life balance, but more recently, human flourishing.
And I love that so much. You're right. I'm a huge fan of your book. We talked about as far as platform. In fact, you and I were communicating not too long ago. As you know, I just recently moved down to Alabama from Michigan, and in one of those many trips back and forth, I was re-listening to Platform again, and I still remember the conversation we were having when you were like, "Really? That's been a while ago." But it was so inspiring to me, Michael, when I first read that book, that it's like, okay, this is what I want to do. Now, I'll admit, I dragged my feet and tried a bunch of other things, but ironically, that's really what I followed as a framework when I began, after I left my digital agency in 2023. It was that book framework and what you laid, or platform, I'm sorry, and what you laid out in that really instilled so much of that base perspective of what I took. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
You talk about full focus, and I know that's your current endeavor, and I really am intrigued by the balance that you're trying to help business people and others create in their lives, because nowadays that's so hard, even with AI, although AI I think helps in that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Talk to me a little bit about what drove you to that passion to help these people find that balance in their life.
Well, it's been a battle for me, to be honest. If you go back to basically the year 2000, I was the assistant manager of one of Thomas Nelson's 14 book publishing division. So I was second in command. My boss suddenly resigned, and so the CEO of the company asked me to take that position as the general manager, or as they call it in that industry, the publisher. So I was the publisher of Nelson Books. What I didn't know at the time was that division was in real trouble. We had lost money the previous year. It was shrinking in revenues. Staff morale was terrible because nobody likes to lose, and we were the losers of the losers. But he said, "How long do you think it'll take you to turn this division around?" Now, I didn't have a clue. But I said, probably about 3 years. And he said, "Well, that's what I was thinking too. So have at it. Go with my blessing." So I did. So I rolled up my sleeves and kind of got a vision of what I wanted to accomplish in the next 3 years, took it to my team, and they got really pumped. It was kind of the first time in a long time that they'd had some leadership, and they were jazzed about the opportunity, and partly because if we could get to that position where we were making money and achieving our goals, then everybody would make a bonus. So we worked hard. So we were working 70, 80 hours a week, weekends, no vacations, all this stuff, having a blast, but really out of gas and exhausted.
Oh, yeah.
And so we turned that division around in a year and a half, not 3 years. And so as a result of that, we went from number 14 to number 1 in terms of we were the fastest growing division, the most profitable division, and we scored the highest on staff morale. I got the biggest bonus check I'd ever gotten in my life. It was bigger than my annual salary. And man, I got in the car, I drove home, I was giddy. I could not wait to show it to my wife, Gail. I knew she was going to be over the moon, and it was going to validate all these hours that I'd been working. So, walked in and showed it to her, and she was kind of nonplussed. She kind of looked at it and was like, "Oh man." She said, "We need to talk." And I was, uh-oh. So we walked into the den, we sat down, she began to tear up. And she said, "First of all, I want you to know how deeply grateful I am for your hard work. But I got to be honest, you are never at home. And even when you are, your head's somewhere else." Well, that was hard to hear. It was a gut punch. And then she said, "Your 5 daughters need you now more than ever." And then she began to cry, and she just said, "If I'm honest, I feel like a single mom." Well, that crushed me. And part of it was, Jonathan, I felt like I was facing this impossible choice. I could either go all in on work and really buy into the hustle, I call it the hustle fallacy, or I could put on the ambition brake and kind of throttle back my professional expectations and kind of settle for the sake of my family. Neither one of those sounded great, although if I had to choose, I'd like to think I would have chosen my family. So that sent me on a multi-year quest to begin to see if there was really such a thing as life balance. And a lot of people poo-poo that concept today and say, I believe in life integration, or I believe in life alignment, or all kinds of terms. But I still advocate for life balance. And, I've achieved that, not perfectly. And sometimes I backslide, and sometimes I struggle with it. We should talk about that in the context of AI. But yeah, it's been a challenge. But now I basically help entrepreneurs. I have some personal coaching clients. I have a big group coaching group of about, 600 people now. And so I coach them on a weekly basis. But all of it's built around this concept of the double win. Is it possible to win at work and really scale your business at the same time, not compromising your health or your most important relationships? And I say, yes, it is. But you won't drift into it. You have to design it.
I was just going to say it. I love to hear that it's possible, but I also got to believe, based on my own life, that it requires purposeful decision and planning in order to make that happen successfully. I absolutely love that. You mentioned AI, and let's take that transition, Michael, into AI, because you have definitely embraced it from everything I've seen, and you're really using it to amplify the skill and experience that you've gained over the years. What about AI excited you? Because there's a lot of people, especially in your industry, that have not embraced it, that are kind of looking the other way and saying they hope it goes away. What caused you to embrace AI when you came across it and when you saw what was happening?
Such a good question. I've always think like I've been on the cutting edge and often the bleeding edge of technology. I've loved it from the very beginning. Back in 1981, and that's probably long before most of your listeners were born, but I bought an IBM PC back when they were $5,000, and I was only making $30,000 a year. So it was a big chunk of money, but it didn't do much. And so I had to teach myself to program. So I learned BASIC and I learned Pascal, and I started writing programs and just loved technology. And then I switched over to a Mac in about 2001, I think it was. And that set me on another trail that I loved, and I'm kind of an Apple fanboy, and I know not all your listeners are, and that's fine.
That's all right. I am. You're in good company.
Okay, good. And so I'm like totally bought into the Apple ecosystem and all that. I was an early adopter of social media. I started blogging actually in 2004. And so I was, at the time, a very busy CEO of a publicly held corporation. And I still found time to blog almost every day. And I was trying to find the future, because I realized that everything was going digital and in the book publishing space. Kindle had not been released, but the handwriting was on the wall, and I knew it was going to be disruptive. And then social media. I got onto Twitter, now X, to Facebook, and several different platforms because I wanted to find the future. In fact, interestingly, my board came to me in 2009 in the grips of the Great Recession, and they said, "We want you to stop blogging. We think it's a distraction. You need to be focused on the business." So I took a deep breath. It's two guys, two representatives of the board, and I said, "Well, that's not going to happen." I said, "In fact, I'm a little shocked. Because if I wasn't involved in this, being a publishing professional and the CEO of this company, if I were a board member, I'd be demanding that I get into this because we've got to find the future." And so they backed off. I never heard another word about it.
Oh, wow.
But it was that important to me. And then, of course, I'm always one of those people that when Steve Jobs would announce a product, I would buy it. Well, when AI came along, I knew this was unlike any revolution we've ever experienced. Bigger than the internet, bigger than the personal computer. All that stuff was necessary for AI to happen, but that was all the pre-show to the show. And so, yeah, I'm just like super excited about it and geek out on it. And I think partly it satisfies two things. One is my love of technology, but then also my need for creative expression. And AI, I feel like, has made me be more me to write higher quality content and certainly produce it faster than I could do without it.
Well, and again, I love how you've embraced it and brought that in. I obviously am a huge AI fanboy as well as Apple, and I do believe that it's a tremendous tool that we can utilize to help us get things done faster, to bring more value to our audience. And I, as a content producer, definitely not a publisher, but somebody who produces a lot of content, I love it because it allows me and my ADD brain, which I got diagnosed when I was 43 and explained a lot, but to actually get so many more things done now, because things that I used to go, oh, I'll get to that later, I can literally do in 5 or 10 minutes now and get marked off my list and feel like I'm getting things done and being accomplished. So I love to hear that perspective coming from you and where things are at. As you take a look at managing time and balancing, going back to full focus, balancing life and work and all that, how do you feel AI fits into that process? Have you thought that through, or have you started bringing that into some of your coaching?
We're having a vigorous conversation at Full Focus among our executive team. We had our annual team meeting last Friday in Nashville, where I live, and my daughter's the CEO of our company now. And so she had written a manifesto on basically sort of our commitment to be analog first and AI second, which was really interesting. So, and of course, I agreed with all of it. We published something called the Focus Planner, which is an analog tool, much like a Daytimer or some of these other tools that were popular back in the 80s and 90s. But we published this in 2017. We sold 1.2 million copies of it. And the reason we developed it, Jonathan, was because we realized that you can get sucked into a digital environment that's enormously distractive.
Oh, yeah.
And can really keeping you from accomplishing your goals and your tasks. So we wanted the ability to pull people out of that environment for task management and for just the sake of focus. And it's been enormously successful. I really believe in it. And there's a book that, if you haven't read, would be worth reading. Two books, actually. One is called The Revenge of Analog. And the second one is called The Future of Analog, or The Future is Analog. And I think it's a both-and thing. And so I love AI, but I never wanted to usurp my humanity.
Oh, absolutely.
I want to keep humans at the center of it. And I think, our mutual friend Julia McCoy talks a lot about this, and I think she's dead on sort of the balance between those two things. But I think it holds such promise. But to be honest, it's a little bit of a challenge on the time management side.
Yeah.
So maybe this is more autobiographical than a cultural observation.
Fair enough.
It's kind of like you go, that task used to take me 8 hours, like to write my weekly newsletter. Now I can do it in 2. And so I'm saving 6 hours. Except that I fill those hours all back up with other stuff. So I'm not really saving time, but it is allowing me to do other things than what I would do before. I think the other thing too, for me, and again, maybe this is autobiographical, but I've been a real student of dopamine and its impact on us, and particularly addiction. But I would say for most of 2024, I got an addiction to AI. I could not stop trying tools and writing custom GPTs and all this stuff, and it really got obsessive. And thankfully, my family confronted me about it in December and just said, buddy, you got to dial it back a little bit because you're missing out on a lot of life. I know you think you're going to save time, but you're really busy trying to save time. And,
I love that.
And so I did. So, there's that.
It sounds like you've got an amazing family, and I think the communication that you guys have is just a testament to things, because it's, things happen like that in life. We get, and things ebb and flow and all that, and I can relate to the challenges you're talking about. One of the things you mentioned that I want to go back to, and I think is so incredibly important, is there's a whole lot of people out there that are worried that AI is going to take over and take all our jobs and everything else. And I'll share my opinion first. You probably know it, but I'd like to get your thoughts. I really believe that AI is essentially nothing without us as humans. It needs us to direct it. It needs our skill, our experience, and all that. I think, again, it's just, there's so much I want to talk about, but talk to me a little bit about your perspective on that, Michael. How necessary are we as humans in that collaboration process from your perspective?
I think we're essential.
Yeah.
And I think that for the very reasons you said, to really direct it, I think there's certain things like intuitive learning, cognitive processing is one thing, but intuition and creative inspiration are a couple of other things. And, every time I say that, I always kind of hear a voice in the back of my head that says, well, for now, So maybe I will get to that point. But right now, I think humans have got to be central to the process. And I have a high risk tolerance. And I think there's certainly a risk. I mean, nobody knows where this is going. And job displacement, no question that's going to happen. I can remember back in the days when, executives used to have, we called them secretaries in those days, which is really, a negative connotation today. But there would be somebody on a manual typewriter or an electric typewriter. That was the technological advance, an electric typewriter. And then people started getting personal computers, but they were so expensive that not every assistant had one. So we created, for example, a typing pool or a word processing pool. So there were like 20 people down there. They happened to be mostly women. And as executives, we would dictate into to a recorder and send that down, and then the next day we would get back the document, and then we could make changes, mark it up, and send it back. But then guess what? Personal computers, the price came down. Everybody got a personal computer, and all those that typing pool was replaced. And you could look back on history. You know, the people that were blacksmiths, they were replaced because we didn't ride horses like we used to. So I think every technological revolution, it's not that it eliminates job, it shifts jobs. Hard to say that. Shifts jobs in the marketplace so that new jobs arise as fast as they're deconstructed or decreated. But it can be definitely unnerving for some. I've been watching with interest the whole thing about the longshoremen, you know, and like it's so much automated in China and Japan and even in Europe. But you know, we're insisting on no robotics, you know, on the docks,
Right.
and it's really holding us back. But those people are so afraid of losing their jobs, and I can certainly understand it. But there'll be new jobs created.
Yeah. Well, I love the way you explain that, and I think it's one of the best explanations I've heard, is that these technologies bring with them as many or often more new jobs than they're displacing. I just moved from a community in Michigan where we have a tremendous Amish community there. And it's one of the only communities that probably actually has a buggy whip maker, because there are a lot of Amish there. And so there needs to be somebody. And it's one of the only communities I'm aware of where you can get a wagon wheel fixed, literally, you know, like Little House on the Prairie with the metal rim and the spokes and all that, because there is a community there. But those jobs were largely displaced when the internal combustion engine came out and cars came out and all that. But they created so many more jobs that there were plenty of opportunities. And I think that's one of the things that I see missing so often from those in the, I'll call it the naysayer community, that I agree with you. There will be people in jobs that will be displaced, but there will be opportunities for them to move into. And I believe more opportunities than even exist today. I believe that'll bring that. But they often miss that part. And as I look back and try to study history, I haven't found a time when a new technology has come out, and I remember the PC revolution very well. I remember the people that weren't going to ever give up their typewriter, and that was just, you know, that was never going to be replaced. Even though some of those jobs changed, there were more jobs that became available. We weren't sending the entire typing pool home and say, sorry, you no longer have a job. There were other jobs that became available and things because of the technology. That brings me to my next question. You had mentioned earlier that when you first heard about AI, Michael, you felt that this was a technological, and I may get your words wrong, but basically a technological shift unlike any we've seen before. Yes. As a successful business person and somebody who's led companies, talk to me about what you saw and what you see happening now as far as why is AI different than, for example, when the internet came out in the mid-90s?
Well, I think each of those technologies have leveraged different things. Like the internet leveraged connection.
Yeah.
You know, up until that point, you had to be in proximity to the person. I mean, if you go back even before like the telegraph, you know, to communicate with somebody, it took a long time for the mail to arrive. Then the telegraph changed that, and ultimately the telephone, and then television, and all those things have brought us closer together. And I'm not naive. Those things have come at a cost in many situations too. Sure. Social media, particularly, but I think in each case the technology leverages something about humanity that could be a force for good or for a force for bad. And having come from the book publishing world, you know, the very printing press that, by the way, put a lot of scribes out of business.
Good point.
But the printing press came along, and then it got even more and more automated. It was initially, you know, single sheet fed printer, and then it became, you know, these rolling printers that could mass produce books and all of that. And so all that was good, but the same printing press that could print the Bible could also print pornography. And so there's the technology is a little bit neutral, but it depends upon how it's employed. And I think AI is the same thing. But the thing I see about AI is it not only enhances our cognitive abilities, but I think it augments our creativity, and it gives us the ability to process mountains of data that we've never had before.
Yeah.
And the speed at which that can be done is enormously helpful. You know, you could argue that, for example, in my business as a writer, that there's something inherently valuable about just wrestling with a sentence and really taking time to write it. And, I don't disagree. There's sometimes that AI will get me something back pretty good, but I still have to kind of wordsmith it a little bit.
Oh, absolutely.
But I had authors arguing with me 40 years ago when I was just at the beginning of my publishing industry career that said, no, I've got to write it out longhand. I'm not going to use a typewriter. I'm not going to use a computer because there's something about writing it out longhand that's inherently valuable. And they may have been right, but those people don't exist anymore. They probably, maybe a couple of them exist, but they don't exist anymore. So I just think that AI has the ability to leverage what we've never been able to leverage in the past at a scale that we've never been able to achieve in the past. So our capacity, our creativity, our productivity, those three things in particular, AI enables us to really optimize those for the sake of, I think, being even more human and spending more time on the stuff that actually matters, not on the menial stuff that doesn't really count.
You bring up so many interesting points in that, Michael. And one of the things that I really love about that is just the ability to respond quickly. Today's attention spans are probably shorter than that of a gnat. I had the opportunity this morning to hear a question and then develop a response to that within just an hour. Something that historically might have taken me a day or two and then maybe would have never been completed. And I really see that as a tremendous tool. That brings the other side of things, and I'd be curious as a publisher and a writer, it gives us the ability to create more content than we've ever had the ability to create in our lives. It reminds me a bit, I hadn't thought of that, but the printing press. When the printing press came out, we had the ability to create much, much more content. How do you see that volume of content evening out? Because right now we're obviously in a spot where there are a lot of people just creating a lot of content. Not all of it's valuable. How do you see that kind of working its way out, maybe similar to what it did with the printing press? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is an opportunity for us who are committed to quality to really differentiate ourselves from those who aren't. Because I think a lot of people will use AI, and I've certainly seen this before, where they're just chunking out all this stuff, and it's just it's like digital vomit. There's just so much of it, and it's really not helpful. And you can kind of tell when that's happening. So I think for people that regard themselves as craftspeople and people that are going to really curate something and kind of give an artisan touch to it, I think it's going to be easy, maybe not easy, but it's going to be possible to stand out from the rest. I actually think the human created stuff, where it's been really thoughtful and it's really been carefully curated and thoughtfully created, I think that's going to rise to the top. And I think it's becoming increasingly rare because just the ratio is going to be, a lot of junk to the stuff that's really good. And so I think the really good stuff is going to become increasingly rare. And as a result of that, just supply and demand, it's going to be increasingly valuable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. To me, the analogy I used with somebody the other day is, if you walk into a bookstore, there's thousands and thousands of books in there, but yet there's a few dozen that are selling thousands of copies, and the rest of them are not. And I think with AI, the content game is going to really play out very similarly. There will absolutely be lots of content, but the content that's well done and helpful and adds value to the audience will continue to excel because it will rise to the top. I'm convinced of that.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, as we begin to bring the plane in for a landing, one of the questions I love to ask people, and I'd love your perspective, Michael, is 2025, I believe, is going to be a year in which many businesses and business leaders finally, I say finally, but actually embrace AI and try to bring it in both for themselves and their teams. And as I've been working with my clients over the last year, I find kind of two different diametrically opposed perspectives. One is, we're going to do everything and we're going to do everything today, which doesn't work out because you can't get everything done today. And the other is, I'm going to continue to keep my head in the sand, and this AI thing, we're going to let it go by. I don't think that's the right answer either. What advice would you give to that business leader, whether they're an owner or a manager or wherever they're at in their organization, as they take a look at bringing AI to help both themselves, their team, and their clients? What advice would you give them that maybe they should take a look at over the next, say, 3 months as they start bringing that in? Any advice to that business leader?
Yeah, I would say that, one of the characteristics of leaders is that they initiate. They go first. And your team will follow your example. So this is not something, in my opinion, just like I believed in blogging and social media and all that, I believed I had to embrace it as a leader if it was going to be adopted in my organization. So even if you're not technologically inclined, and even if you think you're too old, I'll be 70 this summer. So I don't think age is a barrier. I don't think that these tools are easy to use. I think even building custom GPTs, which who knows if we'll have to be doing that 6 months from now.
Yeah,
But,
I don't know.
but yeah, all that stuff. I just would decide, and this is what I decided at the beginning of 2024, actually the end of 2023, is that I was going to do a deep dive on AI this last year. And if I was going to influence my team and get us to adopt it, then I was going to have to go first. That's what leaders do. We're the first in. And so we have to embrace it. And I would just say, start with ChatGPT, bring it into your company, do some training, share what you're learning, read a couple books. Like I always recommend Co-Intelligence by Ethan Malik. I think that's such a great
Excellent.
book. Most AI books, by the time they're written, they're out of date. But this is one that's not. And so I would read that book. We read it as a team internally. And then my daughter asked me to lead 2 4-hour AI workshops internally with homework assignments. And then we just had a blast creating custom GPTs for our own internal use and for content creation. But I honestly think, and this is a warning to those of you that think that maybe you're just going to sit this one out or you're going to hold back and kind of wait and see how it plays out. I think we're fast approaching a dividing line where if you're not on board, you're truly going to be left behind. And I think this is an existential question. If you're going to survive and if you're going to thrive through the next literally 12 months, you're going to have to get on board. Now, it's not the other extreme that you mentioned, which is go all in, stop everything and just do nothing but AI. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying there's got to be a thoughtful, purposeful, measured adoption of these tools inside your company, and you've got to begin to use them. If you do that, you're going to be way ahead for what's coming next. If you don't do that, you're not even going to understand what's coming next.
So good, so good. You mentioned you're just about to turn 70, and I'm 55. I have believed since AI came on and I started getting involved in it in 2023, that AI is the first technology that we've seen, at least in my lifetime, that has actually been able to allow those of us with, I will say, more experience and maturity to have more advantage than the younger crowd. I've got a 30-year-old son, and he uses AI occasionally, but not a lot. I've got a 17-year-old son. He rarely, if ever, uses it, isn't that interested in it. But yet I find amongst my clientele and the people that I coach that there is a huge group of people between 45 and about 75 that are using AI because it allows us to amplify skill and experience. And I'd love your personal perspective as someone who's 69, turning 70. What are your thoughts on that? Is AI's ability to actually be even more beneficial to us when we have some maturity and some experience?
Arthur Brooks wrote a great book called From Strength to Strength. And he talks about, have you read that book by any chance?
I have, yeah, excellent.
Yeah, and so he talks about two kinds of intelligence. And there's a kind of intelligence that he calls fluid intelligence that's early in your career where the cognitive processing is really optimal and you can just create the work and do all that stuff. But that begins to slow down over time. But now you've got the accumulated experience to develop wisdom. And that kind of wisdom is what I think the world is so desperate for. Just knowledge or even just cognitive processing isn't enough. Wisdom is the ability to take all of that and apply it to specific situations for a positive outcome. And, I feel like in this stage of my life, my goal is to grow fruit on other people's trees. And so it enables me to do that. I'm able to leverage what I've learned, my experience, the skills I've accumulated over a lifetime, and be able to use those to serve other people. And I'm so excited about it. There's so many things I want to do before I die. And, hopefully I have a few years left. But AI just enables me, I think, to optimize that time and really expand my impact and my influence in a way that's, responsible and helpful.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I so appreciate it. And Michael, thank you for the time today. I know you've got so much going on, and I just want to truly thank you for your time, the kind words, and the collaboration we've been able to do online. It really means the world to me. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. I've enjoyed being with you.
If people want to reach out and connect with you, we'll go ahead and put that in the show notes as well and make sure all that information is available to them, and especially if they want to learn about Full Focus and the value that you bring to folks there. If you've listened or watched the podcast today, I want to thank you for joining us. We do this for you. We value you, and we'd certainly appreciate your feedback. With that, everyone, make it a great day, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.